Okay, I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's session entitled A Universal Digital Data Integrity and Compliance Infrastructure for Data in Flight. And this presentation is brought to you by Astrix and Scitara. And we can go to the next slide, please. Before we get into today's session, I want to take a moment and introduce you to Astrix Technology. We have been putting on a series of lab informatics and laboratory technology and laboratory best practices webinars now for the better part of a year, bringing together thought leaders from throughout the industry. We've got a good one on with us today in Dave Levy from Scitara. But briefly, who is Astrix? We're a consulting company that delivers highly specialized services, process, and technology, as well as outsourced services to fundamentally transform how science-based businesses operate. We do this in an effort to improve scientific outcomes and hopefully the lives of people everywhere. And a few quick stats on Astrix. We were established back in 1995, privately held today. We originated as the IT division of APBI, which is a life science research organization. Today we operate from 7 offices in the United States and beautiful Costa Rica, and we are headquartered up in Red Bank, New Jersey. We are a market leader in dedicated digital transformation services and expert consulting services and outsourced services for the scientific community. Types of customers that we help: Fortune 1000 life science enterprise, chemical and CPG, government and research institutions, generally organizations that have large and fast-growing IT. So that's enough about Astrix. Now I'd like to take a moment and introduce you to our speakers for today. So we can go to the next slide. Briefly, I'll do a brief introduction. I'll let the speakers introduce themselves as well. We have Dale Curtis, who's the CEO of Astrix, joining us today, as well as Dave Levy, who's a global product director at Scitara Corporation. Dale and Dave, if you'd like to respectively take a minute and introduce yourselves, that'd be great.
Dave, go ahead.
Thank you, Dale. Appreciate it. So thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone taking time out of their day to join. My name's Dave Levy. I'm responsible for product management and strategic partnerships at Scitara Corporation. I've been in the business for many years, spent time at Waters, New Genesis Technologies, Cambridge Soft, and PerkinElmer. The topic of the day, I think, is very pertinent, one that I and a number of my colleagues have been challenged with over the years, and I know that many of you have as well. So it's a pleasure to be here, and look forward to the conversation. Dale?
Dave, thank you. Looking forward to the event today with you. Dale Curtis, CEO of Astrix Technology. I've had the pleasure of running the laboratory informatics consulting business and for the last near 12 months as CEO of the company. I've been in this industry for over 23 years, helping companies leverage technology within the laboratory space to get more value, to get more data integrity, and really just to get a huge amount of efficiency gains for these lab spaces. So I'm really excited about sharing the topics today with Dave and the successes that Scitara has had with leveraging an agnostic platform for data integration. So we're looking forward to today. Thank you. So as I start off, when I think about digital transformation and data integrity, this slide represents a pretty busy, we call it the subway slide internally, but really what this is it's a series of paths, and it's a series of paths that each and every one of you are on in varying degrees. We work with companies that have ideation, organization, all the way through skills mapping as part of their agenda, and we have companies that may only be on one of these paths. And I think the important thing to recognize here is that regardless of which path you're on and how far along that path you are, it's to identify workflows in your organization that you can map end to end. And if you can do that, then you're able to work on transformational initiatives that happen in a commercially reasonable time frame. We don't have to wait years to digitally transform any given process or part of a laboratory or part of an organization. You can take this in bite-sized chunks. Let's take analytics, for example. Maybe you're in the analysis and equipment data stage, and your desired state is to have in silico experiments or digitized R&D at the end. Being able to map that out in a framework that really requires your people, right, your processes to be mapped appropriately, taking the steps up front to make sure that the as-is and to-be processes are mapped adequately are really critical in setting this framework up. Looking at your overall architecture, and not necessarily the architecture of a given system in your laboratory, but the architecture of your environment, where that data is being put in, ensuring that the data is getting assembled and integrated into the right system, and then ultimately that you've got a good integration strategy. And I'm really happy to be partnering here with Dave, as they've developed a cloud-based technology platform that if you do all of that upfront work and you're really organized in such that you've got the people, the change management, and the processes organized such that the data flow is accurate and it's what your business needs, you can really start to leverage with a lot less pain, if you will, than if you don't have those things assembled. So, with that, I'll transition this over to Dave, and we're looking forward to hearing a little bit more about DLX and digital transformation in the quality space.
Dale, thanks very much. Appreciate the intro, and that's a great slide, by the way. A little bit about Scitara, and then we'll dive into the topic at hand. I think that Dale's introduction is appropriate. Scitara is as Dale mentioned, provides a cloud-based platform that really is focused on transforming the way that resources in the lab, and by resources we're talking about anything from LIMS and e-notebooks to a balance on the bench to PC-based instrumentation, transforming the way that these resources work together, establishing a scientific integration platform on which they can exchange information in a clean and simple way. And really what that does, that integration platform really drives three fundamental things. First and foremost, by providing a real scientific data mobility concept, it supports digital transformation in the lab. And this has been a struggle that has been ongoing. Actually, it's been ongoing since the lab was invented, I think, but it continues to be a challenge today, as there are so many digital transformation strategies out there among customers and vendors alike, that the laboratory presents a unique challenge because of the diversity of different types of systems and the way they communicate with the outside world. The platform also supports really the topic of today's conversation, which is data integrity for data in flight. And we'll get into a little bit more about that as we go forward. And then finally, last but definitely not least, it provides the ability to separate the integration platform or the integration layer or infrastructure from the different applications and instruments and resources that need it. And this provides the ultimate flexibility in being able to create a true multi-directional data exchange layer to achieve digital transformation. So let's talk a little bit about Scitara Digital Lab Exchange, which is the foundation technology under the scientific integration platform that we've introduced. So our own version of the subway slide, Dale, is really this illustration of the way that traditional connections are made in the laboratory today. Now, the title of today's discussion is about data integrity for data in flight. One of the real challenges there is that in order to establish data integrity for data in flight, first data has to be in flight. And that's quite honestly still a bit of a challenge. So it's not hard to put together point-to-point connections between any two endpoints in a lab. There have been companies out there that have been doing it for a long time, many of the vendors in the vendor space. I'm sure a lot of you on the phone have developed some of your own internal initiatives to get that done. The challenge really comes along when you think holistically about the lab and what I call the matrix effect. So the diversity of instruments in the lab, the diversity of workflows and processes that are going on in the lab create an environment that is really just impossible to manage, and creates an environment where you realize that point-to-point connectivity is simply not compatible with digital transformation. You just can't get there. It creates an environment where equipment always winds up being left behind. You're always having to make a choice around, is this particular integration important enough to justify the time, the expense, and the effort to not just build it, but maintain it. And so because there's always instruments that are left behind, you never really achieve your digital transformation. And the transformations, or I should say the connections that you do establish, tend to be segmented. Each vendor, most of the integration platforms today are really driven from the larger LIMS e-notebook systems that are out there. And so not only do you have a diversity of equipment, but you've got multiple integration strategies all competing and running in the lab at the same time. So to overcome this particular challenge, the Scitara team and Scitara Digital Lab Exchange embodies what we call a peer-to-peer platform. So we took a first principles approach. We realized very quickly that the current model for integration, while individually capable, is simply not going to satisfy a true digital transformation strategy. And so we've established, if you will, an infrastructure that different connections can plug into. And when those connections plug in, they publish what they can do. So a connection for a LIMS system might plug into the platform, and once it's plugged in, it will announce itself and say, here I am, this is what I'm called, here's the data I can accept, and here's the data that I can publish. And it can see and is configurably available to see all of the other connections that are on the platform. And what this does is it sets up a dynamic where data can be freely exchanged between multiple endpoints on the platform at will. And so the connections, form the plugins, if you will, and then the exchange is done through a technology that we call orchestrations. It sets up the business rules and it's fully configurable. And so what this does, again, is it creates this separate intelligent infrastructure. It's designed not to be yet another application that scientists need to learn and use. The goal, as with any good infrastructure, should be that it ideally is embedded into the existing workflows and systems that are in the laboratory. So when we look at the connection infrastructure, we break connections down really into 4 primary types. Simple devices, anything that doesn't have a PC attached to it. This could be an analytical balance, pH meter, titrator. Your traditional instrument applications, which range from standalone PCs attached to a single instrument to the larger HPLC enterprise class systems. Informatics systems, which could be e-notebooks, LIMS, MES systems, and then even generic web services like Office 365, OneDrive, Box, Google Sheets, for example. So these are the different types of connections, and we have a wide variety of different types of technologies that allow us to create these connectors in a library type of an organization that customers can use. These are commercial products, commercial parts of the Digital Lab Exchange, and they can be configured to plug into the infrastructure. Now, the connections are designed to thread as seamlessly into the workflows as possible. So our ideal connectivity is through an API. But we do support file exchange as well. There's a lot of applications out there that still can only exchange information by way of files. But once all those connection endpoints are established, then the orchestration engine takes over. And this is one of the key areas that we think is important to establish a data exchange and data in flight environment, is the business rules that determine the data that flows between and the conditions of the data that flows between the endpoints. Very often, historically, these have been hard-coded, and they're very purpose-built, very purpose-specific. They work, but they only do exactly what they're designed to do. And if you want to change them, you have to basically write code to fix it, or go through a fairly complex process. What we've worked very hard to do in the Scitara world is to create an environment where these can be edited. They can be modified by customers. It's designed to work that way. There is an orchestration editor that allows you to create very simple to very sophisticated orchestrations. They can be fully event-driven, totally automated. They can be user interactive and prompt users for information that is needed to send data downstream. They can be used to send notifications when there's an action or that needs to be done, such as maybe a balance weight that needs to be taken or data that needs to be reviewed. And they can also reshape and do calculations on data in flight. So as as data flows between the endpoints, it is very common, in fact, it's more common than not, that the way data is received from one application is not the way it wants to be sent to the target application. The data needs to be reshaped or transformed or reformatted, choose your term, so that when it ends up at its target destination, it's in a process, it's in a form that can be ingested properly. And this is something that the orchestration engine is designed to do. And if calculations need to be made on data in flight, that can be done as well. So the orchestration engine creates that, that environment that allows you to automate up to your level of comfort the different digital data workflows that are happening in the laboratory. And now as we get into a little bit more about the topic at hand, right, on the monitoring side, in addition to the ability to monitor orchestrations in flight, which is very useful for laboratory administrators, they can actually see orchestrations as they execute. There is a full, in addition to that, a full digital transactional history that is stored within the Scitara DLX platform. We call it the event stream. You can think of it as an audit trail for instruments and applications, if you will. All of that communication going back and forth in context, understanding the orchestration that was used, the connections that were used, as well as the transaction in parameters, but also the payloads, the actual data that flows is all stored in a transactional model inside of our system and can be recreated at any point in time. So whether it's an hour, a day, a year, 10 years later, you can go back and you can look at this information, you can reconstruct the flow of information. And it is this event stream that provides that, that data integrity. You know exactly what the data looked like when it was picked up, you know what was done to it in transit, and you know what it looked like when it was dropped off. And I'm going to show some examples of that as we move forward in the presentation. So what I'd like to do for the next few minutes is talk a little bit about connections and orchestrations. Because to understand the nature of the event stream and how it's constructed and translate a typical user workflow into, so you can see the output of that, it helps to have a little bit of understanding around the tools that are used, if you will, in the toolbox. So Scitara DLX, as we put together that connection infrastructure that I mentioned before, there are a number of different connector technologies that we support. And I mentioned earlier that the ideal connector technology is an API-based connector, excuse me. And that provides, in our experience, the best user experience. And we have a very strong partner program. And we work very diligently to reach out and partner with vendors in the space and develop relationships with them, and have a relationship that allows us to have a copy of the software, have an API, build the connector, work with them as changes come about. This is what really works ideally for for end users, is both that kind of natural relationship, but also the ability for us to really thread Scitara DLX into the application. One of the reasons that the Scitara Digital Lab Exchange platform has been well received is that it is very focused on a specific task. Our job is that transport layer, that infrastructure that I mentioned. That allows us to form relationships with vendors where our goal, very clearly stated, is to be the infrastructure, and for the user experience, we want it to look like all of this is happening from within the application that launches the orchestration. So if you're inside of an eNotebook, for example, and there's a button configured to create a sample queue in an HPLC system, when you push that button, it might be actually calling the Scitara DLX connector and launching an orchestration. But to the end user, it actually looks like it's happening from inside of the notebook or inside of the LIMS. And the best way to do that is with an API-based connector. But we do support, as I mentioned, file exchange. There's many applications out there that that don't have an API. And there are also, we know, very large repositories that just have gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of files that would love to go somewhere. And, you know, the Scitara Digital Lab Exchange is a potential source of opportunity to mine that data, extract key information out of it, and send it to a data lake, for example. We do offer a generic web service connector. So any system out there that has a generic web service that supports gets and puts, you know, we can configure a connection to that. We do have an IoT-based connector. So you might have been wondering, how does Scitara get those balances and pH meters and titrators, and, you know, how do they get data from those things into the event stream? And what we have is a small device. It's typically about 2 inches by 2 inches by 1 inch. It's an IoT device. It's provisioned with Scitara software. It interfaces with the instrument through typically USB or RS-232, and that is what provides the connectivity for those instruments. It allows us to the instrument to call out to us. It allows us to send the instrument requests. It allows the instrument to exchange data. This is really, through the IoT experience, primarily where, you know, most scientists and analysts in the lab would even know that we're there. For a lot of the other exchanges that I've mentioned before, in many cases, if we do our job right, people don't even know we're in the lab. Data just shows up where it's supposed to show up. In the IoT world, we provide a user interface to allow the customer, to allow the user to interact directly with the device, let's say through a tablet or a phone. It's based on a QR code pairing between the IoT device and the instrument. A login is required, and it allows data interaction with the device through a connection that is secure, but also you know who's doing it. You know who's logged in. It's possible to add a memo. It's even possible to take a picture and inject that into the event stream. So it really changes the dynamic in the laboratory around how data can be exchanged with between simple instruments and other applications, whether it's a LIMS, an e-notebook, or even an HPLC system or other instrument. Then the final type of connector that we have is, we call it a manual or a universal connector. And the universal connector or manual connector is really designed to support environments where there simply is no connectivity. And even in today's world, where the internet is pervasive and it seems like, you know, IoT is everywhere, the reality is there are still plenty of devices out there, or even situations where you need to read a dial on a wall, where there just isn't any connectivity. And what the manual connector allows you to do is to configure the connector in such a way that you can tell it what type of information you're looking for. You can define the parameters that need to be captured. You can define the range of acceptable values within that parameter, within those parameters. And then while it is still a manual input, there's still a login. You know who's logged in. You know who's actually entering the data. And in addition to the data itself, a memo and a picture can also be taken to kind of corroborate that particularly if you're reading a dial on a wall, or if you have, let's say, a pH meter that just doesn't have any connectivity, you can take a picture of the actual screen of the device that has a time and date stamp that is correlated to the manual data entry, and that gives you additional assurance that the data integrity, and injects it now into the digital stream where it can move on to its target destination. So this is a kind of a portfolio of technologies that we bring to bear when we're working with our vendor partners and with customers that can address pretty much, in fact, so far, every situation that we've seen in the laboratory. We've been able to address using one or a combination of these different technologies. Now, I mentioned a little bit about orchestrations, and I wanted to give you a picture of the Orchestration Editor here. This has been very often a key missing piece that we see as enabling digital transformation, and then subsequently data integrity for data in flight, is the ability to create business rules or configure business rules in a way that can be changed and have reasonable flexibility and sophistication kind of built into one package. So the idea behind the Orchestration Editor is that this is a part of the Scitara Digital Lab Exchange platform that would typically be accessed. In fact, most of these tools would be accessed by the administrators that set the system up, the configurations, the orchestrations. As I said, the folks in the lab that are executing these generally don't have to worry about, they should never see really the Scitara web console. They shouldn't have to. These types of tools, the goal is to really put the power back into the hands of the folks that need it. So with a reasonable amount of training, end users can create their own orchestrations. They can be very straightforward and very simple. They can be more sophisticated if needed. We do have the ability to insert what we call function transforms. So you may recall I mentioned earlier about the ability to reshape data or to do calculations on data in flight. That's done using a function transform where we allow JavaScript to be inserted into the transform. And that JavaScript can either be, written out by an end user, or it can be wrapped in a wrapper, if you will, if you're going to do the same thing over and over again, where all you have to do is provide the inputs and the outputs. This gives you tremendous flexibility in terms of addressing workflows and changes in workflows. Orchestrations, think of an orchestration as a series of steps. You can have as many steps in an orchestration as you need. If you need to, you can edit an orchestration if you have the appropriate rights and privileges to do so, to insert a step in the middle. You can, for those that have edit functionality or edit capability, you can make adjustments to the orchestration function transforms as needed, and which then supports the ability, there's full IOQ capability, and really gives you that ability to have the best of both worlds. You have the flexibility, the capability, but it's well wrapped, it's well controlled, and it's easily validated once it's done. Excuse me. So when you combine orchestrations with all of the connections, right, and inside of each step in the orchestration, you again, when you choose what's the connection endpoint that you want to work with, you have a list of all the available connections that are out there. So it provides you to move data in multiple directions at the same time. So if we want to get a sense as we come to the end of the slide presentation, what does this look like in practice? And it's a little hard to do. We were thinking about trying to do this live, but it really doesn't support itself very well. So how do you get from an orchestration in flight, which you kind of see on the screen here, this is the orchestration monitor, and some of the resulting data that you see in the event stream, as shown from within an orchestration. What does this look like in practice? So we put together, to the best of our ability, something to give you a sense of what this might look like from a user's perspective, and then what the resulting data stream, the event stream, looks like to show you the actual resulting record. And this is just a picture of our event stream, from within the application. So let's take a look for a moment. If you would imagine, if you will, that this might be a table in a LIMS or in an e-notebook, something like that. And as very often happens within those systems, you build a sample list of data that you want to send to, let's say, an HPLC to do an HPLC run. And you've got your standards, your blanks, your samples. Now, in the process of executing this and creating this from the LIMS, right, the idea is you want to just push a button to create sample set. You might need to choose the system that you want to use. Credentials are always extremely useful, especially when you're working with a multi-user system, because that determines, for example, in this particular case using Empower, the projects that you can see. You select the particular project, you want to put the sample set in. We then provide a list of or a table which represents the sample set. This can allow insertion of particular method sets on a per row basis or additional editing. If you already have this information up front, you can skip any of these steps. It's all fully configurable. So for example, if you know the method sets for all of the different rows in the table already, you can just skip this step and they'll just automatically drop in. And when you're done, the sample set is created. You get a positive confirmation, and you never need to go to the HPLC system to actually create the sample set, right? The key thing is, and going back to the title of the talk about digital data integrity, the details, row by row details of that entire sample set are stored in our event stream and are represented on the screen. So at some point in time later on, if you need to, as I said, go back and recreate this and understand what actually was sent to Empower, right, in this particular example, you can do that. And you have all of that detail as needed. Now, on the flip side, when the data is coming back, right, you want to retrieve your results. And when that happens, right, there's a couple of different ways that you can do it, but in the ideal world, since if you're using Scitara DLX, we've created the sample set, so we can do it in an automated way because we know the sample set name, we know all the results that are associated with it. But the key thing is to make sure that you understand what those results look like, right? And so, for example, the event stream that comes back, right, also has the full payload of the different results that were made available. And so now what you've got is that all that connectivity layer that Scitara Digital Lab Exchange is providing not only facilitates the connection of all of the endpoints, it facilitates the business logic that dictates the flow of information back and forth and captures not only the transaction itself, the fact that the transaction took place, but the full payload and the data as it flows through the system. So that can now be resurrected as needed. So if we think a little bit about the future, which is really kind of where Dale and I were going here with this concept, even though there are struggles out there today around full digital transformation in the lab, it's coming. Tools are coming. Scitara Digital Lab Exchange is one of a number of different technologies that are being developed to do a variety of different things in the lab that support digital transformation. But for digital exchange, we are providing that infrastructure that is going to allow digital data to be exchanged at will. And as that happens, the volume of information that is exchanged in a digital way is going to continue to increase. And as that continues to increase, the need for data integrity for data in flight becomes even more important. So that is why we wanted to share both the Scitara Digital Lab Exchange technology with you, but also this compliance and digital and data integrity layer that's going to be really critical as we move forward. And with that, I'll just wrap it up with one final slide, and I'll move through it fairly quickly, that the goal of the Scitara Digital Lab Exchange platform and the broader scientific integration platform that we're building is to really put power back into people's hands to enable digital transformation in a real way by connecting all of the endpoints, all of them, so you don't have to leave any instruments behind, to facilitate the ability to easily add new technology and change out instruments, to give you the flexibility to create your own orchestrations, to derive and modify and change your own workflows, but be confident that there's end-to-end digital compliance, that the system is designed and built for compliant workflows, for compliance. We've been audited. We expect to be audited again. The digital transactional record in the event stream is there. Full audit trails are also available for all of the user-derived activity inside of the system. We're really working hard to support what's going to happen as more and more people really drive towards full digital transformation, and to support our customers in a compliant environment. And with that, I'll thank everyone very much for their time. It's been a pleasure. Dale, I'll turn it back over to you and Kevin.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. Great presentation as always, Dave. And there's one thing I wanted to call everybody's attention to was we recently kind of kicked off the Astrix Digital Transformation podcast. So we're really excited about this. I'm actually putting, if you'll look in the chat section. It should go out to all audience. If you see on the right-hand side of your screen, if you look at that chat, you're going to see a URL there that you can click on. That's going to bring you right into the Astrix website on that page where that Astrix and Scitara podcast is hosted. So this is going to be a regular podcast that Astrix is producing. We opened up our inaugural one with our partner here at Scitara. Great session, great kind of back and forth discussion on some cool topics with Dale and Dave. So tune into that, check it out, download it, and be on the lookout for more. We'll also include a link to that when we send out the recorded version of today's session. So I just wanted to call your attention to that. And I think we can go to the last slide here, Dave, and we'll look at some questions real quick. All right, folks, we'll go ahead and do a couple things here. Number one, I want to get the recording stopped.